So today I'm going to present a work co-authored with Georgi Stellari and Jan Borner with this title that Fazlullah just read right now. And the idea behind this work is political discourses and deforestation. So in the beginning of my presentation, I would like to ask you to reflect on a specific question. Do you think that political discourses change people's behavior? Try to reflect on that specific question and try to think about your personal and own experience regarding that. Do you remember some specific day in your life that you watched the TV or you read some newspapers or whatever, and a politician was saying something that changed the way that you behave in your life? So we have some anecdotal evidence that indeed political discourses might change people's behavior. Here we have two illustrations, quite recent one in two different institutional settings, one in Brazil and the other one in the US. On the left part of this figure, you can see people protesting against the results of the last presidential election outcomes in the US when Donald Trump lost. And on the right part of this figure, you have a similar situation, but now in Brazil, people protesting against the results of the presidential election, the last one. Just to give you an overview about the topic. So the main motivations behind our study, they have some specific concerns. The first one, deforestation, it's an interesting topic, an important one, because it can be related to different things that we have been experiencing right now, such as the biodiversity loss or even the problems related to climate change. So it's worthy to analyze deforestation. It's worthy to understand deforestation, of course. And more than that, we can also observe in this huge literature, we have like several empirical studies analyzing deforestation and trying to understand the drivers of deforestation. But at the same time, you have studies showing different and heterogeneous results regarding deforestation. So you can observe in the literature some studies analyzing a specific type of policy that is able to reduce deforestation, for instance. But at the same time, you also have empirical studies analyzing deforestation, analyzing similar policies, but in different contexts, and those studies do not find effects of reduction of deforestation. So recent literature has pointed out that the political factors behind that is also relevant to be analyzed. So this is the main motivation of our study here. And this new and recent literature is also called as political economy of deforestation. So those studies have pointed out attention to the political factors behind the relationship between policies aimed at reduce deforestation and deforestation levels by themselves. The main idea behind this literature is that you have some political factors regarding election cycles, which directly affect the deforestation rates and the way that they are reduced. And at the same time, you also have some other political factors that are not related to election, but they are also relevant to explain more or less deforestation. So this is the main motivation of our study. Politics also matter for deforestation. The specific research gap that we address in this study is about political discourses. It's a little bit ambitious to say, but at the same time, I would say that it's a little bit reasonable, fair to say that this is one of the first studies that analyze the effects of political discourses on deforestation. So this is the research gap that we try to address in our study. The idea behind it is that most of those empirical studies, they look at specific and observable political manifestations, such as the creation of new public policies, or such as creating a new public agency in charge of monitoring deforestation and see how those things change the deforestation patterns. Instead of going ahead in that direction, our study tries to look at a different perspective. And in this case specifically, we focus on the message being transmitted by politicians, and we investigate how those messages change deforestation. So this is the research gap in our study here. The main background, maybe some of you might know, but the main background in our study is related to the economic model of crime from Gary Becker, a classic model in economics, at least, created some decades ago. So the main idea behind this paper and also other literature that we use as a theoretical background in our study is that information matters for economic decisions. So if you have more information or if you have less information about a certain topic, the way that you make your decisions will be different. That's the main starting point from our background. And the idea here is that different communication channels can affect these economic decisions. So you have some empirical evidence from this literature showing that effects from newspapers or effects from some specific door-to-door information campaigns are able to change the way that you behave in terms of economic decisions, of course. But here, we are interested specifically on political discourses. And why? Because political discourses also transmit information. And at the same time, we are interested not only in the behavior of everyone, but we are interested in the behavior of a specific type of economic agent. In our case, is land users or farmers. And the idea behind this economic model of crime from Gary Becker is that when you make an economic decision, you have two components that directly affect your decision. A component more related to the benefits that you can gain from your decision, and the other component more related to the costs that you might bear because of your decision. In this specific model, they are not talking about actions or economic activities in general. They are only talking about illegal activity. So when you do some illegal activity as an economic agent, you also think about the potential benefits and the potential costs that you might have while you do that activity. This is the main theoretical background and the logic behind our study here. Specifically, we address this research question in red, right below in this slide here. The idea is to explore how land users react to political discourses, but not all the political discourses, a specific kind. Here, we are interested in analyzing the effects of political discourses that might change these costs from the illegal activities. And in this case, we focus specifically on the discourses, on the political discourses which suggest a change in enforcement. So how land users or how farmers will react to that? The main hypothesis that drives our study is that land users will react in a not a good way after they are exposed to those political discourses. The idea here is if you are exposed to a political discourse which suggests a drop in the environmental enforcement in your region, for instance, you are inclined to do more illegal activity. And in this case, we expected to find an increase of deforestation because of this information of lower enforcement. This is the main hypothesis that we have. So once farmers or land users are exposed to those kinds of political discourses, we expect to find an increase of deforestation. And why? Because those messages will communicate to the farmers that they have a lower potential costs due to their illegal activity. So the cost of punishment will be lower because they are observing information from politicians saying that there is a lower enforcement. So they change the way that they behave in terms of decisions. This is the main hypothesis that we have as well. And we choose a specific institutional setting to test this hypothesis. And we decided to go to Brazil, the Brazilian Amazon rainforest. And for a very specific reason, this country and this region more specifically, they experienced a strong political regime shift some years ago when they had a new national government in which you could observe a totally change, a very strong change in the political discourses regarding environmental protection in that country. So because of that, we decided to look at this empirical case as our case study, because you have a shift in the way that the new administration was talking about environmental enforcement in Brazil and in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest more specifically. Here is just an example about that, and this is a message said by the former president from Brazil, Jair Bolsonaro, and here I quote, "I won't allow IBAMA to go around issuing fines left and right." And for those of you who don't know, IBAMA is the main public agency in Brazil in charge of protecting the environment in the country. So they give environmental fines. They also send enforcement personnel to the field to make sure that everything is all right. So the idea here is that this specific political discourse transmit a message that will change the way that people, in this case, land users, see the government, or even the way that they see environmental enforcement in Brazil. In addition to that specific example, we also can observe a strong event that occurred some years ago in Brazil, and this event was called as the Day of Fire. The Day of Fire, maybe you can imagine why fire, right? The idea here is that it was not one day, but actually it was a week or even some specific days in the month of August in 2019. And in this specific period, a lot of journalistic investigations, police investigations, and also some scientific studies suggested that a group of farmers in Brazil, in the Brazilian Amazon, they were organizing themselves through different social media, such as WhatsApp, Telegram, Twitter as well, Facebook, and they were organizing themselves to show support to the new administration. And how did they show support? They set fire to a specific place in the Amazon rainforest close to a highway there, because that specific situation, that specific place had been mentioned by the president in several interviews, that the Amazon rainforest was okay there, there was no problem there. So they organized themselves, they set fire to the forest, and they also kind of communicate a feedback to the administration saying, here, hey, come on, we are here, we support you. So don't worry, you can say whatever you want. So based on those anecdotal evidences, we thought that the Brazilian Amazon rainforest could be an ideal case study to test our hypothesis. Our specific empirical strategy here is that land users, once they get exposure to those political messages transmitting a decrease in enforcement, they will change their expectations. Again, they will change the way that they see the benefits and the costs by doing illegal deforestation. This is the main rationale behind our empiricals. And to test that, we use a specific type of data. We specifically use Twitter data here, and for several reasons. The first one, Twitter started to be used by different politicians in Brazil in the last years. Why? Because it's less costly to them to send the message that they want. So politicians in Brazil, some years ago, or I would say that more than 10 years ago, they started to use that. And the idea here is that they started to post in Twitter saying the things that they were doing, such as new policies or the group of society that they supported and these kind of things. So Twitter started to be used by politicians. This is an important case for us to be taken into account as well. And at the same time, using Twitter data can allow us to test very local effects from tweets. Here is just an example to give a sense to you what we can do using Twitter data. Of course, so probably most of you might know that what is F, right? And here in this figure, so we have Zeph in the center of the figure. And here I just draw this blue circle to show to you that if you want, we can collect all the tweets being posted in that specific area. And not only that, we can also define more than the spatial resolution of the collection of the data, more than the spatial resolution about the tweets. We can also define a specific time window. So if you want, you can collect tweets being posted from people here in Zeph today, yesterday, 1 week ago, or 1 year ago. So this can also help us the way that we design our identification strategy. And another important point to take into account here is that, so we define the spatial region that we want to collect the Twitter data. We can define the time window that we can collect the data. And finally, we can also define the type of data that we want to collect in terms of content. So instead of just collecting all kinds of tweets, you can also define which kind of content you want to collect and you want to analyze. So in this case, you can define different keywords or different hashtags in order to get a sense of the content that has been posted in Twitter. This is the main reasons why Twitter data could be useful for us to test our hypothesis in that specific case study. And at the same time, we also find from the literature that Twitter has been used not only by politicians, but also by citizens. As probably most of you also have a Twitter account. I don't. I just had one for the study. but probably most of you might have a Twitter account, because it's also interesting to you as an academic to go to Twitter and talk about your studies, talk with your network, and so on. And some studies from the literature has pointed out that Twitter has been used as a communication arena for different topics, and even for topics that started not in Twitter. Sometimes you have a heated discussion in WhatsApp, for instance, about a specific topic, or maybe about a specific police, or maybe specifically about a politician. And then these heat discussions also migrate from WhatsApp to Twitter as well. So using Twitter data can help you to give a sense on how those things are connected, and at the same time, how they are linked. This is the first. So until now, we have talked about our background, our hypotheses, and also some kind of the data that we plan to use, that we have used actually. But at the same time, we have some empirical assumptions in our data, because as I told you before, I don't have a Twitter account. So I'm not totally aware of everything that has been posted in Twitter. It's the same about the land users. Some specific land users, they have more or less exposure to the things that have been posted in Twitter. Maybe because they don't have a Twitter account, or maybe because they are not interested in that. So the first empirical assumption that we have in our study is that people do not have the same level of exposure to the things in Twitter. That's the first thing. And in our specific empirical case, we state that the Brazilian municipalities in that region, they also have different levels of exposure of the things that has been posted in Twitter. And how we measure that? So how you can define the level of exposure of someone in Twitter? The idea that we define in our empiricals is that the higher the number of posts in a specific location about a certain topic, the higher the exposure to that topic in that location. And we also have a second empirical assumption in our study. So you might say, Gustavo, but people, how can you measure if a specific land use in Brazil, in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest, in the middle of nowhere, in the middle of the forest, how these people are reading tweets? Actually, in our empirical strategy, we do not need to measure that directly. You can also measure that in effect indirectly. So this is something that we call as more like a people talk effect, or more like a gossip effect. And probably all of us have already done that before. So when you see a specific message in Twitter or even in the news, you do not keep that to yourself. You also talk about that with your family, with your friends, with your neighbors. So our empirical assumption here is, even though land users are not being directly affected by the tweets, that is, they are not reading the tweets, people are talking about the tweets in their cities. So they have been exposed to that tweets indirectly. This is the second empirical assumption that we have. So now we start to talk a little bit more about the data, and also a little bit more about the identification strategy that we have. In order to measure the effects from the political discourses on deforestation, we use a specific approach in the economics literature that is called shift and share approach. And this is our treatment variable. So this is the variable that measures the effect from political discourses. Just one second. So this specific treatment variable is formed by two different components, the shift and share, as the name says, right? The shift component in this treatment variable is measured in the following way. Here, you have the shift component as only a time variant variable. So it only varies across time, not across the municipalities. And the idea here is to measure the political tweets. In this case, we define specific governmental accounts in Twitter to collect that data. And here we chose 4 specific Twitter accounts. The account from, of course, the official one. We chose the former president account in Twitter. We also look at the account from the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Environmental, and also the Minister of Foreign Affairs. Okay, so we chose all those Twitter accounts. After that, we collect all the tweets being posted by those accounts, and we collect that data, of course. But we specifically only in the year of 2019, and I will explain that in just a few slides as well. Once we have collected all the tweets being posted by those accounts in 2019, we then read all the tweets It was thousands and thousands of tweets. It was a little bit of work, let's say. Once we have read all those tweets, we also classify them. Because some of the tweets, they were no sense. They were just about politics, or they were just about football, or they were just about Santa, for instance. And the idea is it was to identify the specific tweets from those politicians that were about the drop in the enforcement levels in Brazil, or the drop of enforcement levels in the Amazon rainforest. Once we have identified all those tweets, we then created a count variable summing all those tweets per month, and for a specific reason that I will explain in some minutes as well. So the shift component of our treatment variable is a count variable which identifies all the political discourses related to the drop in enforcement levels regarding the environment in Brazil. And then the other component of our treatment variable is the share part. And of course, the share also refers to Twitter. In this case, we have a component that is only a spatial variant. So the share component in our treatment variable only varies across municipality, but not across time. In this case, as I mentioned to you before about our assumptions, our empirical assumptions, here we define the level of exposure to the tweets from the politicians. So in the share part here, we measure the Twitter activity per municipality in Brazil in the topic of forest conservation. And again, our assumption. If people from a given municipality have posted more in Twitter about forests, it means that they are more exposed to those political discourses. And here we chose the year of 2015 and the year of 2018 in order to get exposure measure related to the past activities in Twitter from those cities. And again, the Twitter data. Why is that relevant? Because we can define the tweets only from the cities. And to do that, we define a spatial area per municipality. As you can see, right below there, we define a specific area in each of the Brazilian municipalities to collect the tweets being posted in those areas. And here we define a latitude and longitude point in each city, and we chose to use these coordinates regarding the sede municipal, that is the main city hall. So it's like the city center of a city. And we also define a radius of 5 kilometers to collect the data from that specific circle in each municipality. So our treatment variable is an interaction term between the two, the shift and the share part, the political discourses and the level of exposure to the political discourses. At the end, this is our final data set. We have a data set at the municipality and also month level. So we have observations varying across municipalities and also varying across time, across months, actually. And as I already have explained our treatment variable, let's talk about our outcome variables. Here, we chose 3 specific deforestation outcomes. The 3 of them represent the same content, the same meaning, deforestation. We specifically focused on 2 different kinds of deforestation alert systems in Brazil that is called the GLAD and the TIR. And why you chose those ones? Because they have different technological platforms, so they are able to identify larger or smaller levels of forest clearance. So that's good to test the robustness of our results. And at the same time, we also test the effects on the deforestation regarding forest fires in order to see whether our findings are the same or not to the deforestation alerts. And why we specifically focus on the year of 2019? Because that was the first year of the new administration. So usually, once you are in your office as a politician, the first year of your mandate is the one that you usually do more activities, right? So this is one of the reasons. And the main reason is because that was the year that none of us had experienced the effects from the pandemic of COVID-19. And we have a huge literature from Nature, Science, and different journals showing that the COVID-19 indeed changed a lot the deforestation patterns in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest for different reasons. For instance, the government had to reallocate the budget from education or even from environment to fight against the pandemic for health issues, of course. So you have a reallocation of the budget. And at the same time, you also have a reallocation of attention from the citizens. So after the pandemic, people stopped talking about deforestation because you had a bigger problem in your face, right? So this is the main reason why we decided to keep only the analysis only in the year of 2019. This is a very brief illustration to you just to show how one of the deforestation alert systems can be observed in terms of spatial distribution in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest. And here, this is just the deforestation alerts for the year of 2019 again. And here you have the same kind of illustration, but now regarding the share component from our treatment variable. The idea behind this, to show the two maps to you, is just to illustrate that even in the period before 2019, so the years 2015 to 2018, you cannot find a perfect overlap between the two. What that means? That means that the share, the forest Twitter activity in those municipalities was not capturing past deforestation. And that's quite relevant for our analysis. Otherwise, we would have just an endogenous relationship between the two, the deforestation outcomes and the share component in our treatment variable. So it's just to show to you that you have different cities in terms of deforestation outcomes and different cities in terms of Twitter activity. So that said, here is the main equation of our study. We use a simple fixed effects model, including municipality and month fixed effects model to control for the invariant heterogeneity in that levels. And we are interested specifically in beta, the main coefficient of interest that we have here. And at the same time, I'd like just to say to you that instead of using a traditional regression, we also do that, but we also include some quite relevant control variables, in this case, related to deforestation. So in our equation, we also include some variables regarding climatic variables such as temperature, rainfall levels, and we also include some variables regarding the enforcement levels in Brazil. And all of those controls, they vary across municipalities and they also vary across months. And we also have some data, some controls regarding rural credit because they are correlated to deforestation. And we also have some economic incentives regarding agricultural production. Okay, so we have our hypothesis, we have our empirical assumptions, our background, and our estimation strategy. So let's go to our main results here. As expected, not expected, but as we constructing our hypothesis, we indeed find a positive relationship between political discourses suggesting a drop in the enforcement levels in Brazil with an increase in deforestation. Oh, something that I forgot to mention here, our outcome variables, they are transformed using an inverse hyperbolic sine function. So all of the results that you can see here, you can interpret them as a percentage change. So in this case, you can observe that the political discourses created a 2.3 increase in the deforestation alert in Brazil. And the same for the other alert system, the deter. So here you can observe a 3% increase. And finally, you can also observe a 2.2 increase of forest fires once municipalities are exposed to the political discourse that I mentioned to you some slides ago. Okay, so we have our main results. In order to get a sense whether our results are robust or not, we also run several tests just to make sure that our identification strategy is reliable. So the first robustness check that we perform is just a correlation matrix here, just to show to you, as I said before, comparing the two maps, that you cannot observe a correlation between past deforestation in the annual unit and the share component of our treatment variable. So the idea here is that people, they are not going to Twitter and posting about forests after they experienced deforestation in their city. So this is really important for us because of the identification strategy. So the idea here is that you do not have a direct correlation between the two, but actually you can observe the effects of the political discourses on deforestation, not because of the shift part of our treatment variable, but actually because of the shift, not because of the share, but because of the shift part of our treatment variable. So the political discourse is being posted. And then we have an additional robustness check. Now we change the share component in our treatment variable. As I said to you before, we were measuring the Twitter activity regarding forest for all the municipalities. Instead of using that specific share, here we replace that by another measure. And here we just replace by general Twitter activity. So we are not measuring anymore if people are interested in the forest conservation topic, but only if they are being active in tweeting. As expected, we also did not find a relationship between this new treatment variable on deforestation. And that's good because it means that after you have the political discourses in Twitter, you do not observe an increase in deforestation if you do not have a specific informational channel to channel the information from the tweets from politicians to the land users. So this also provides support to our identification strategy. And then we have another additional robustness check just to show if when we change the shift component in our treatment variable, if we have a different results regarding deforestation. So the idea here is just to test the other perspective, because before we were talking about messages suggesting a decrease in enforcement. Now we test messages suggesting an increase in enforcement. So the idea here, in a perfect world, we should have found a decrease in deforestation. We did not find. We did not find any statistically significant effects from those specific tweets in suggesting increase in enforcement. And here we specifically look at a Twitter account from the Federal Prosecutor Office on message regarding army or police operations in the Brazilian Amazon. So they were increasing the enforcement levels there, and we didn't find that effect. But there is some potential explanation for that. The main one is that the effects from political discourses are not the same of the effects from this federal prosecutor's message. And why? When we are talking about politicians, people nowadays, they seems to be like the fans of a football team. So it's not the same. When you observe a message from a politician, you do not observe the same effect from the message of a celebrity, for instance, because you have a kind of reputation behind the message as well. So you have a kind of effect regarding the leadership that the politician represents. It's not only about the message, but also who is transmitting the message. So the idea here is that the effects from politicians are stronger than the effects from the federal prosecutor office. And here, an additional robustness check is just to see and observe whether the positive relationship between political discourses and deforestation is still hold when we exclude from our data set the dry season months in the Brazilian Amazon rainforest, because that specific period in Brazil, you have a more natural deforestation levels for several different reasons. And we still observe our effects there. Another test that we perform is just to check whether our results are there, our results hold, when we also address some well-known and also famous policy instruments used in Brazil to control deforestation. In this case, we just exclude from our sample the municipalities affected by this specific and well-known instrument called priority list. This priority list was a policy from the from the Brazilian government, which listed some specific cities in Brazil that had a lot of deforestation in the past, and because of that, IBAMA and also other public agencies in Brazil, they would send more personnel to there to monitor and also to control the deforestation. Finally, our last robustness check. The idea here is just to explore whether the positive relationship between political discourses and deforestation vary across different land tenure regimes. The idea here is that land users have different costs and at the same time, different benefits by deforesting in these different land tenure regimes, because you might have a stricter fine if you are deforesting in a conservation unit area, for instance, or if you are deforesting in the indigenous area, you might have different implications in terms of the benefits and also in terms of the cost that you might bear. So to conclude, my last two slides, the message behind our study is that political discourses also matter. So the things that the politicians go to TV and they say, or if they give an interview to a newspaper, that also matters. The way that people will see those messages can change the way that they behave. Here, we just suggest that politicians should also mind their language while talking about forest conservation, and not only in Brazil, but also elsewhere. I'd like to conclude my presentation here. This is the last slide. The idea here is just to show to you that this is still a work in progress, and we are also planning some additional next steps to include in this empirical analysis. And the main point here is just to illustrate to you that so far, we have analyzed the effects from a cost perspective, but we also needed to change the benefits of illegal activity. So we also needed to change that specific perspective. And here we are planning to conduct some additional empirical analysis exploring these three different pillars. The first one, some land users might change the way that they deforest according to the potential economic benefits that they might receive from deforestation. So if you might receive more revenues from deforesting, probably you are more likely to deforest. We still needed to take that into account in our empiricals. And at the same time, we also state that there are different opportunity costs involved, because if you are in a city in which you have a lot of forests, so your opportunity costs are different to a specific city that you have lower forest cover because you have lower forest to the forest. At the same time, we also plan to test this behavioral factor, in which we state the following. Once you go to jail, you will not be the same anymore. So if a farm get an environmental fine, they will not have the same behavior regarding illegal deforestation. I'm not saying that this person will be a good guy after the fine. No, I'm just saying that this person will be different. So we also want to include if some specific cities might present some different effects from the political discourses if they had more or less environmental enforcement in the past. And finally, we also want to include the role and the relationship between the different types of politicians. Maybe some local mayors or some local politicians, they also might facilitate or make it harder the activities regarding the message from the president. So the idea here is that maybe later local mayors, they will facilitate the way that people deforest because they also agree with the discourses from the president. Or at the same time, they also might act that way because they have the political incentives in doing that. If the local citizens support the president, the local mayors might also go in that direction. So that's it. Thank you for your attention, and I'm looking forward to the comments and to the reactions.